Welcome, and thank you for joining me for another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast, coming to you from the Podvlog studio in St. George, Utah, and produced by Markel Consulting, LLC. I'm your host, Dave Markel. Welcome back, everyone, to Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. This is episode 24, and I'm excited and honored to introduce to you my guest this week, Amanda Coleman, better known as the Irish Angel. Those of you who are in law enforcement or are firefighters or are in the military most likely have already heard of the Irish Angel. She and her Irish Angel team and mission are well known for providing all kinds of support and help to the first responder community and the military. What you may not know is that Amanda is a sexual abuse and rape survivor, and that she credits her desire and motivation to help those in blue and in our military to overcome their trauma to her personal journey of surviving her own abuses and trauma. Thank you for tuning into this episode. I hope you get something out of listening. My bet is you will. Here's Amanda. Amanda Coleman, the Irish Angel, thank you so much for being with me.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
I know Amanda's probably familiar to many of you who are listening to this, but I was unaware of Amanda as the Irish Angel until about 4 months ago when I was interviewing Vaughn Kleem and his training partner, Nicole Florisi, and Amanda reached out to me after that podcast aired and let me know that she was a personal friend of Vaughn's. And so we just kind of started communicating, and I found out more about her and was intrigued by her work and her nonprofit, especially having been in law enforcement for almost 20 years myself. What you're doing, Amanda, is so meaningful to me and so important. I just had to have you on this podcast.
Thank you.
Amanda, could you please just tell our audience a little bit about yourself in terms of who you are and where you are? Because she's not based here in the United States, but most of her work is U.S. based. Give us a little introduction into your life and what's going on with you.
Yeah, I live in Dublin in Ireland. I kind of just fell into Irish Angel by pure accident about, I want to say it was 2015. It was in the run up to the elections. And we were having some issues of our own in Ireland, whereas our law enforcement was in a lot of bother with the public, given what was going on with our government. So even though law enforcement has the same mission to always, look after people, prevent crime and all this kind of stuff, America's a very different entity to Ireland. So all of our law enforcement in Ireland, they can't talk about what goes on within their job. Everything is vetted. It goes through the Garda press office, so nothing can be released. So when there was a lot of trouble happening in Ireland for the law enforcement, it bothered me because I have family who are in law enforcement. Knowing what I know of the people behind the badge, I knew that what the public were angry for, and rightly so, was also what the cops were angry for, but they had a job to do and orders to follow. It is their job. I wanted to talk about it. I wanted to go online and show them support because there was so much negativity surrounding them. And my cousin said, Amanda, he said, don't. He said, we'll get in trouble. He said, if anything, you need to see what's happening in America. And I was like, what do you mean? And he was like, there is cops being shot in their cars. He said, it's really bad. There's actually a war on police officers. In my head, I'm like, but law enforcement have guns. We don't. Like, how can this be? Like, I was trying to have it register in my brain. So I went online, I did research, and I was bothered by what I was seeing. And it seems to be now that there's a pattern, right? So every time there's an election, sadly, law enforcement as a whole is used as a pawn, whether it's a negative thing or whether it is a positive thing. It's whatever suits an agenda at the time. And sadly, people don't think about these officers are human beings. You can't play with people's lives, their well-being, how they are mentally, looking at the families burying people, and law enforcement officers losing brothers and sisters. That really bothered me. So I took to LinkedIn. I posted messages of support on LinkedIn, not even thinking that anything was going to happen. Didn't even think that the posts would even make it to America, but I used the hashtags and it did. About 2 weeks in, I was inundated with messages from support. across America thanking me for what I was doing, because cops felt that everything they were doing was in vain, and they didn't matter that I wasn't from America. They just felt that someone cared enough to post about them. So that got to me. So I launched a website that was username and password, which was like a safe haven for people to go to talk amongst themselves. There wasn't that negativity, you know, that they could be themselves. And it was just a blog website, and we had like a little forum on there. We could talk about issues and what have you. And in doing that, I was watching the conversations back and forth between the families of officers or veterans or first responders and myself. I'm looking at the conversations, and it's triggering things in me. Because I come from a family that has had addiction and mental health issues, and I've grown up being the child of that family. So I was bothered by it all. And then I started to do more research around mental health within the services, because I knew at the time that the suicide rate was extremely high within the veteran community. But I'd no clue just how big it was. It was growing within law enforcement first responder community as well. I was just really hurting over it, you know, because, which we'll touch on about my life, is like when you've lived the life that I've lived and you have this understanding of trauma, not only just from your own trauma, but seeing families suffer from addiction or suffer from mental health, you know what that feels like, right? So you want to try and help. But I knew I couldn't. I was like, I'm not an American citizen. I can't do anything. So a friend of mine is the sheriff in Schenectady, New York. He reached out to me and he was like, Angel, he says, you've all this following now. He said, what do you want to do? And I was like, I can't do anything. I'm not an American citizen. And he's like, no, but I am. He said, so he said, you do the research and you figure out how best you want to help, and we'll get a nonprofit going. So I did. I went over to the States in January 2019, went around a couple of facilities to see what was the treatment out there, what was there available to those in service. The consensus across the board was that if an officer or a veteran was suffering with mental health or addiction and they were going to go into treatment, they would normally send them out of state. And in doing so, that can bring financial costs with it. And a lot of the time, if you're in crisis, so is your finances. So they couldn't afford to go travel to get their treatment. So I knew that's where we needed to start. I wanted to be boots on the ground, be able to physically help people, as well as, you know, educating people around this kind of stuff too. So that's what we did. We applied for our 501. We got it in December 2019. Then we were hit with COVID when we were just about to launch in March in Boston. I think everything happens either for a lesson or a blessing, and that was both for us, because it allowed us time to sit back and educate ourselves more on the needs and the wants around mental health and addiction, and then help build this network of resources, put together like programs that we can work on to educate people around mental health and addiction. That's where we went. And then obviously then the riots happened. So it was kind of like a snowball, right? It's like you were hit with one, but you just keep getting back up and keep plowing along. And it's like every time you get back up, there's another thing that hits you, right? Yeah, the riots happened and companies were afraid to be affiliated with someone who was representing law enforcement. So that kind of hurt us as well. So it was literally a case of, are we going to make it or not? But we just held our own and we did it. And we've been doing good things ever since. So yeah, we're doing really well now. Really well.
I can see that. I love following the website and seeing what you're doing and your posts on social media. I keep up with that. And the good in that, of course, is the financial support, the mental health support, the strength that you're giving people to get through their really tough times. A lesson or a blessing? I love that.
In my case, it's nearly always both.
I'm going to adopt that. I think that's a great way to look at everything that comes our way.
It is for sure. It's you have to look at it that way, because, and even today, like every day I do like a little post. I think you see it on LinkedIn, and it's there's always a theme to the day, right? So Thursday is Throat Punch Thursday. People be like, "Why are you so violent?" I'm like, "I'm not." It's a term that's used in the military, basically, that you have to fight for what you want in life, whether it is something within your personal life, whether it's to do with work, whether it's to do with just life in general.
Okay, so say it again for me.
Throat Punch Thursday.
Oh, Throat Punch Thursday.
Yeah. So the whole concept around Throat Punch Thursday is that, like, you know, it's to give people that kind of little bit of spunk to get out there and take the day on and stand toe to toe with what you need to face. And,
Right.
we can get knocked down so many times, but it's a true saying. It's not how many times you get knocked down. It's about getting back up and fighting. As I said, that reflects through just how you are personally or your job or whatever, because we all get those days where you just don't want to do anything, right? And everybody's entitled to those days. Lord knows I have enough of them. As long as you don't stay within those days, you're okay.
One of my
Yeah.
guests calls those kinds of days the craptastic days.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's true. But we learn from it. Like, everything that's negative that's happened to us. It's been my mantra for life. Like, realistically, it's like everything that has been bad that happens, or, situations that you find yourself in or whatever that's negative. It's how you deal with that. It's how you take their lessons learned, valuable lessons learned that you will not do again moving forward. And that's the way to look at it. Try not to victimize yourself in anything, to try and say, you know what? Yes, that happened. Yes, it feels shitty, but it's okay. I'll know the next time. That's the mindset you need to have when it comes to doing that kind of stuff, and that's why a lesson is a blessing to me. It is a blessing because you can channel it into something that's positive within your life moving forward, which I have done with Irish Angel.
Yeah, for sure. Amazingly. You talked just for a second about having someone involved in your life that was in law enforcement.
My brother-in-law is a detective and my cousin is a Garda here. So yeah, they're both in law enforcement. Good people. One's about to retire.
Oh, okay. Amanda, I talked to you before we started recording and asked you if you would be willing to talk a little bit about that area of your life that this podcast specifically is addressing, and that is sexual assault and the survivor story aspect of that. And I know from listening to another podcast that you were willing to share with me that that is part of your life. And you mentioned that you would be willing to talk about it. So what are you able to tell us about your experience with sexual assault?
A lot of it, actually. From a very young age, I always lived, and I'm getting to what I do today and why I associate myself with the first responders and the veterans is we have a clear understanding of repeated trauma. Granted, I'm not within that field, but I understand the people that are in it, and I understand what it's like to have repeated trauma. So not necessarily what we see or what we experience, it's how we deal with it. So someone could have the smallest little amount of trauma, what might seem like small in comparison, say, to what I've experienced. It's not. It's how we process that trauma that is what defines it. You know what I mean? It's not necessarily how great something is versus how small something is. It is how we process it, how we deal with it. So my trauma has been repeated trauma since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. My very first actual memory is of my mom leaving my dad. My dad was an abuser. He used to beat the living hell out of my mom. And we lived in Ireland at the time, was very, what would you call it now? Versus what Ireland is today, it was very rural. It was very old school, very Catholic, very, like you didn't do anything to discommode the church, nor bring shame upon the family. My mom had my older brother. She was being abused by her husband, and I always remember the day that she left, and I was only small. I think I was only about 2, and I always remember wearing a red. It's weird, the things that stays in your brain. A red little cardigan, and crying, just crying, and my mom packing. Eventually, she did move out, and in Ireland, as I said, you wouldn't bring shame upon the family, and she did. And it was not my nan or granda's fault, in fairness, like at the time, because that's how life was. Like Irish people, that's how you were defined. You did not leave your husband no matter what happened, because being beaten by your husband years ago in Ireland was a given. Like that just seemed to be a way of life for us, and no one really questioned it, But she had some bad ones, so she left. We lived in a little trailer at the back of my grandparents' house for a long time. I guess she was always stifled by that because she had to live a certain way, obviously, because of her parents, right? We didn't have anything. We were very extremely poor. And eventually we got like social housing and we moved out. And I think for my mom, because my mom married at 19, So I think for my mom, it was like her freedom. She was now cut the reins from him. She cut the reins from my grandparents. She was allowed to be who she wanted to be. And she went a bit, as you would, a little bit off the rails, partying and everything else. And so there was always that uncertainty as a child, within that environment of waking up to a house full of strangers because they'd had a party, or, there'd be alcohol everywhere, or just, it was just not a nice thing. But it was like that again, it was just how we lived. You never really thought about it till you got older and you had kids yourself. And when I was 9, I was abused by a family member from the age of 9 to 13. That was quite difficult because it was a very prominent family member. It's hard to explain it because you love this person, right? You grew up with this person. You know nothing but love for this person. So this to happen, this violation of you was like, you knew it was something was wrong, but you didn't know what, because I was only 9, and so it just became a way, and it was like a secret. You did not tell anybody, and that was how it was. So you just accepted it. And I used to have to go up to see them every weekend, and they would be there. And it was like I was put in that environment and nobody knew. And so as I got older, I moved away from it. I told somebody and it came back to bite me in the backside, to say the least, because I was accused of being a liar and all this kind of stuff. And, as a child, when you've had that trauma, when you've had that abuse and that violation, you question, was it your fault? Like you feel like you're the wrong party. And then you even question, am I lying? Was I lying? It's weird. I can't describe it. It's like you get this overwhelming sense of guilt, even though you've done nothing wrong. So I just stopped going around, and that ended. And then moving on a couple of years later, my brother had got in trouble with the law. He was an angry kid. Like he had a lot of issues going on. He was troubled. And I understand why he was older than I was, so he would have seen a little bit more than I did. And he did not have that father figure in his life. My mom at this stage had my sister, and she was in a relationship, and the relationship was the closest I've had to a father. But having said that, that relationship was a very volatile relationship as well. Like they used to kill each other. Oh my God, all the time. So it was on off all the time. There was no consistency, right? You never knew. Like my life was kind of like a roller coaster as a child. It was like you never knew what was going to happen on any given day. When he wasn't around, we were living in poverty. Like we were literally in poverty. And so life was extremely difficult, but in a weird way, I only had this discussion the other day. As much as life was really difficult and it was a roller coaster, versus today, where we have everything now, we were kinder people. We were nicer people when we had nothing, because nobody had nothing. So everybody was, much more kinder to each other and helped their neighbor out, so it's different, that part of it I miss. So, and I think that's what got me through my troubles, was knowing that I had friends and I had people that actually cared, that because we were all in the same boat. But like I said, I never really spoke about what happened to me sexually or anything like that. My brother, he was lashing out. My mom's relationship was on off. I was dating this boy. I was 15 and I was dating this boy for about on and off, I'd say for about a year. And it was very innocent. I was one of these, I guess because what had happened to me in the past, I was very conscious about not allowing that happen again, right? So I would never, boys would try it on and, and I'd always push him away. And he would always joke about it. And he used to call me his little virgin of white, because I don't know why I used to always wear white. And he used to say to me, one day I'm going to get that. And I'm like, no, you won't. So, and it got to the point that I said to him, we're done. I'm done with this. So we broke up. A couple of months passed. He calls me back. And the weird thing about it is, as a child, when your life is topsy-turvy and you have no consistency nor constant love in your life, when somebody shows you affection, you kind of cling on to that, right? You cling on to that little bit of hope that this is going to be it, like, right? So he calls me anyway, and he asked me to go see him. And it was up in a place called Ballymun, an awful God-given place. Oh my Lord. It's kind of like, I suppose, the ghetto. It's the only way to describe it, of Dublin. One of the ghettos of Dublin anyway. It's all high-rise buildings, it's all social housing, very poor area. And he was from there. This particular day I went up to see him. He wanted to get back together. I went up to see him and he had a dog with him, and it was what are they called, those dogs? I think it's called a bull mastiff. I said, where did you get the dog? And he's like, this is my friend's dog. He said, I'm minding him while he's away on vacation. He said, I have to go up and feed him. So he said, will you come with me? I said, sure. So we went up to, they're like 14 stories high, these residence buildings. I think it was about the 12th to the 13th floor. I can't rightly remember now. But we went up anyway. I remember walking in the door, and the bedroom door straight in front of me was open, and all there was a mattress on the floor. There was no seating in the house, in the flat. There was nothing. So he went, he fed the dog. I had sat down on the mattress thing, and he came in, and all there was a dresser in front of the mattress thing, and there was like a leather butcher's belt thing across the mirror. I can see it as clear as day now, right across the mirror. I wasn't even thinking anything because, again, it was innocence, right? You don't think of it. This was how kids were. You weren't afraid to go into flats. It was different, a different time then. So he came in, he closed the bedroom door, he sat on the mattress beside me, and then he said, oh, my friend's a butcher. And I was like, I see that. And so he got up and he pulled the knife out of the sleeve thing. It was one of the big old butcher's knives. And he came up and he said, you know the way, he said, I said, I'd take it. He said, well, I'm going to take it today. I thought he was messing first. I thought he was joking. And I was like, give over, will you? And next of all, he stuck the knife to my throat and he raped me that day. It's so weird because you always imagine in your mind that you're going to fight this person off. You know, you always think that you wouldn't, especially with what happened to me as a younger kid. I had become more resilient and more feisty, and I thought to myself, I would never let this happen again. But when he did that, I froze. I completely froze. I can't explain the overwhelming feeling that I got, and it was horrible. It was just, I was praying it was over, and it was over quick. That's all that kept going through my mind, and it was. And the dog started to bark out in the balcony, so he got up and he walked out onto the balcony. So with that, I just pulled my pants up and I ran out of the building, and I'm banging on the elevator for the lift to come. And thankfully it was already up. It went down and I ran. I never ran so fast in my life, but I ran and I ran and I ran. But he caught up with me. It's hard to describe the area now. It was all wooded area around Santry Stadium at the time. There wasn't the buildings that's there now, but it was all like country road, and the woods is on one side and it's just all muck hills on the other side. I was running and I'm breathless, and it was freezing cold. It was an October evening and it was bitterly cold, and I was too cool to wear a coat, you know, so I had like 3 jumpers on. And so next of all, I heard him behind me. He had caught up with me with the dog, and he set the dog on me. So the dog ran and locked onto my arm, and thankfully I had the 3 jumpers on because he left a mark on me, but it wasn't enough to break the skin. And I always remember looking over and seeing him standing there laughing. He was actually laughing at me, and I was like crying. I was asking him to, you know, stop. He eventually called the dog off. I just ran home. And I remember going into the house and feeling so dirty, like just awful. I remember sitting just crying, just like trying to process everything in your brain, right? And again, because it's happened to you in the past and it's happening to you now again, you feel like it's your fault. You asked for this. What is wrong with me that this keeps happening, right? This is what's going through my head. And it's like the shame I would bring on my family if my family knew that was what was after happening to me, because whatever that happened before in the past when I was a kid, I had no control over, but I should have fought him off and I didn't. And so these are the things that's going through your head at that moment. It was awful. Like, they were so bad. I ended up telling a friend of mine, my best friend, Anne. I went to stay with her that weekend. She lived like 4 doors up from my house. And so my mom had gone away and my brother was in the house. So me and Anne had went to bed, fallen asleep, and the phone rang, her house phone, because there was no mobiles then, no cell phones. Her mom came into the room and says, you need to go home. Your brother's looking for you, something about your mom. I ran down to the house, and as I ran down to the house, I walked in the door and there's like a sofa right in front of me. The guy that raped me is sitting on the sofa in front of me, and my brother's sitting, and they're both drinking cans of beer. And my brother looked at me and he goes, you never told me. And I was like, told you what? And he said, you had sex for the first time, he says. And he's, you know, he was jeering me, he was poking fun at me, like. And I just looked over at Paul and I was like, how dare you? You know, I just remember feeling that overwhelming feeling of resentment and hurt and just pure anger. Like I really wanted to lash out, but all I could do was turn on my heels and leave. You know, I went back down to Anne's house. He had already planted that seed in my brother's brain that it was me, that I did it willingly. So now my brother had that hanging over me. And at the time he was in a bad place. So he was using that against me to get, at the time he was, and I think of it now, he was smoking weed, and he would rob jewelry from us. He would, you know, he'd rob money from you, whatever, just to get his fix at the time. He would threaten to tell my mother if I didn't give him X, Y, and Z. He was young and foolish. That was kind of like the sexual assault and the things for me, but that's a massive part of my life and why I do what I do. And that's only like a little, you know, that's only like a little fraction of my life, right? Yeah. But it had such a profound effect on me. But it was at the same time, if it didn't happen to me, I would never have experienced the trauma and have the understanding that I have now on repeated trauma. So I think, and I said this to you earlier on, I genuinely think, for me personally, I can only speak for me. Everybody processes trauma differently. I am not a victim, I'm a victor. As far as I'm concerned, I will not allow anything beat me when it comes to what I've experienced thus far in life, because to experience that and come out the other side of that and come out the other side of it as a better person, I will never let anything take that. I will never give my negative stuff that happened to me the control over me. If you do that, it will have won. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I will never allow that happen. The realization of that for me was when the person that abused me and my family when I was younger, when they were dying, I went to see them in the hospital, and I went up and I told them I forgave them, you know, and I remember sitting there and having the conversation and questioning why. And then I said, you know what, I forgive you. And it was at that moment that I realized that by me doing that, I'm taking control of my life again. I do not allow anybody that power over me anymore, you know. And that was kind of like the turning point for me to say, you're now in control of your life, you know, as much as I could be, given the circumstances of the rest of the stuff that happened in my life. As much as I could be, I was in control. And it was a release. The weight of the world had been lifted off my shoulders. It's the most bizarre feeling, you know. But again, it's just getting back to the whole control thing. I will not allow somebody or something that happened to me control who I am today. So if anything, it's made me a better person today than, you know, I could have easily went down that rabbit hole of staying on that Ferris wheel of negativity and letting everything encroach on your life. But I chose not to. If I did, I would become my mom. And God forgive me for saying this, I love my mom dearly. You know, if you were to ask me if there was what was the one thing that I wanted to be or I didn't want to be in life, that would be it, would be not to be my mom. She had repeated trauma herself. There for the grace of God go I. You know, it's very easy to judge people when in hindsight we're not living in their brain and understanding what they've been through. So I don't tend to judge anybody now. I just kind of listen, and like I said, everybody's got their crosses to bear. That was mine. But I choose not to be her or allow that to happen to me, you know. So I take control. I choose, I make them choices not to become her and get off that Ferris wheel and live my life as best I can, and hopefully bring my kids up the same way.
It's almost like empty words for someone to hear your story for the second time now. Like I said, I heard it when we were on that previous podcast, but it just makes me feel so much empathy and sorrow for what you've been through. And I just feel like I have to say, I'm so sorry you experienced what you experienced.
I appreciate that. But the last thing I ever want is for somebody to feel that, because I don't feel it. I have dealt with that end of it. And like I said, I choose to be the survivor and not to be that victim.
And that's what I think is so important about what you're saying. And where I wanted to go with that thought was, in so many ways, your comments have echoed what many, many, many of my past guests have said, that they would not wish on anyone what happened to them, but that they took what happened to them and turned it into something that they feel proud of and happy for and helpful in this life. And look at what you've done. I mean, it is so amazing Angel, what has come out of all of this. And it is such a dichotomy of past experience versus now and future work to reach out to those who've been through trauma,
Yeah.
whether it's sexual trauma or not.
Yeah, it doesn't matter what the trauma is. It really doesn't. And it took me a long time to figure that one out, because a friend of mine owns a company, Resilient Minds on the Front Lines. I did their course in Chicago back this time last year, actually. And I wasn't supposed to do the class. I was just meant to be there. And next of all, I find out I'm participating, right? So it's like I was in the class for like 3 days and it was amazing. It was absolutely phenomenal. But the thing that got me is, not that you think it, because I would actually talk the teeth out of a saw, but I actually hate public speaking. And when I was there, they went around and we were talking about trauma, and I was kind of dreading them coming around to me. I was like the child who never studied for a test, right? And you're nervous that your teacher's going to ask you to spell something and you don't know how to spell. That's how I felt, right? So I'm sitting there, I'm like, please don't come to me, please don't come. And thankfully they didn't, because by the time they got around to me, it was like, the class had time was up. But anyway, I had been listening to everybody else's trauma that was in that class that day. And as I'm listening to it, I'm like, I was praying that they wouldn't get to me. And the reason being was, as I'm listening to everybody else's trauma, it wasn't that I personally thought that their trauma was insignificant. It wasn't. As I said, for me, trauma is trauma. So like, it doesn't matter how big it is or small it is. It's how you deal with it. So to them, that's their thing, right? Just as mine is to me. So I was praying they wouldn't come to me, because if I had to start telling my life story, and you only heard a little bit of it today, but if I had to tell it all, I would never want anybody to feel like their trauma was insignificant to mine. I'm very mindful of that happening. I never wanted people to feel that their story, their journey doesn't matter, because everybody's journey matters. It's what defines us. We try not to let it define us in a negative way, but it is what defines us at the end of the day. Like, if I didn't experience all those bad things, I wouldn't be here talking with you today, or if I allowed it to eat me up and go down that rabbit hole, I probably would be 6 feet under right now, so I'm grateful for, I know that sounds really weird, but I'm actually grateful for my trauma, because it has made me a better person. It has. I think everything happens in your life for a reason, and that was meant to happen to me, whether it's good or whether it is bad. It is meant to happen. That's kind of how I analyze things in my little tiny brain.
Angel, you're not the first person I've heard say that they are actually grateful for that trauma. It's kind of, for those of us who haven't been through that amount of trauma, and to hear those horrific experiences that you lived through, to now say that you're grateful is just an amazing viewpoint and look on life. I love it. I love what you're doing. I love how you've survived and continue to survive every day. Can you talk to my listeners a little bit about that, what that daily survival aspect feels like for you?
It's like I say, I think we were touching on this earlier on about having bad days. We all have bad days. You just don't stay there. So every day is a battle. Like, I genuinely try not to let anything encroach on my emotions that bad, and which is why it's so important for me doing the work that I do, because I now have purpose. I accidentally fell into this, and I love it, and it is my life. Like, Irish Angel and me are one and the same now. I would happily take a back seat to everything and just keep doing the work I'm doing. And again, I said to you earlier on, it's not about the applause, it's about the cause. It is about that. It's not about the Amanda Coleman show. It's about helping other people and how best to utilize what we have experienced and the team has experienced to be able to help people move forward. So me finding Irish Angel and finding my purpose is exactly what has launched me into having purpose to get up every day and be okay. I couldn't look at myself in the mirror. Like, that'll tell you how bad it was for me. Like, I could not physically look myself in the mirror. Yes, I would get up and I'd blow dry my hair. You'd look in the mirror, but I'm looking at my hair. I'm doing makeup. You're looking at the makeup. You're not looking at the person, right? You don't look at the person, because I had a lot of self-loathing, because you, like I said, for every trauma that happened to me in my life, those 2 sexual assaults on me, they're only a little part of that. But still, all of that weighs in on you and you become toxic to yourself and your thoughts. So like, I would hate how I looked. I was an emotional eater. So I was like, this time 2 years ago, I was 17.5 stone, which is probably about, I think it's about 245 pounds. I would eat my emotions, that I wouldn't turn to alcohol, I wouldn't turn to drugs or anything, but that was how I dealt with stuff. And I hated myself for it. And I would always be the first one to, you know, poke fun at myself before I gave anybody else the chance to do that. That was a battle. That was my way of coping with things. And it was self-loathing and it was self-doubt, so much negativity. So when I found Irish Angel, and I did a couple of the resilience classes, and the more you're around people who have the same passion as you and have an understanding of mental health and wellness, when you surround yourself with people who are great like that, it can have nothing but an infectious way, and you will pick that up, right? So you will get that energy. So that's what I experience now. So when I look in the mirror now, I can actually look at myself and say, you're okay, you're okay. So that's how I feel right now. So my battles are every day, but I have so much love in my heart and purpose that I try my very best, and it doesn't always happen, but I do try my best every day to go, you're all right, and not let the negativity get in on you. But we're all human, and it does every now and then. But as I said, you do not stay within that realm. If you stay there, you're screwed. You know, you need to dust it off and move on. But it is an ongoing battle, but it's one that I'm willing to fight for every day, because I like who I am now. I like that I'm okay.
We're all the better for it. All of us who know what you're doing and who follow what Irish Angel is all about. I'd love for you to talk a little bit, if you could, about the future of Irish Angel. Where do you see things going? What's happening and how is it growing?
Right now we're actually in the process of opening a chapter in Chicago, New Jersey, and South Carolina. We are just building it slowly. You know, there's one thing, Irish Angel, because of the following that we have, we could easily just go all out into the media and do massive PR around it and everything else. But for me, it's organically grown. Irish Angel is a bit like a family. So I never want to lose our identity of why people followed us to begin with. And that's what I mean about it. I don't want it to be the Amanda show. It needs to be about what we're doing and why we're doing it. I want to take baby steps with it. I know we've been around a while, but we've had an awful lot of knockbacks. Like, honest to God, it's like, how many times do you get knocked down? You have to get back up and keep plowing at it. And that's what we continue to do, to grow. And that's why our following continues to grow, because we stay true to who we are. And the sad thing about it is, when you grow, when you have a following like that, it brings a lot of controversy. You'll always get people question you, particularly me, because I'm not from the United States. So I get a lot of flack for that. And the nonprofit world is a very weird world to be in. I was ignorant to the fact that I thought the nonprofit world was people like me. I thought it was people who was doing things for the right reason, as opposed to what I know now. You know, when there's so much corruption within the nonprofit world, and everybody's fighting for that dollar, you know, so it can become a very vicious and a very negative world. But as long as you keep your eyes on focused on what you're doing and your mission, and just keep moving forward, don't care about what everybody else is doing. You know, don't listen to the naysayers or whatever. Just keep on doing what you're doing, focused on your mission, and you'll do good things. So eventually, please God, it will, I hope it will rise to that point organically, but I'm not going to force it. So we're just plodding along and doing our thing. We're going around educating people. The team is growing. We have an amazing resources outlet. So we do a lot of work with resilient minds on the front lines when it comes to resiliency. We do some work with Acadia Health. They're fantastic. They're a very world-renowned behavioral management company that actually helps with a lot of our placements for getting people help. And we do some stuff with Forge Health, and we've just been very blessed to have such an amazing team of resources. The main purpose for us is to be able to have that available for people, that when they reach out to us for help, that we can get them that help. We've managed to get people help from anything from 20 minutes to 24 hours, no matter where they are in the United States. So we're very blessed in that way to have that ability to do so. The team that we have in Irish Angel have all been first responders or military or in the services in some way, and have experienced their own trauma. And they come around, we go around and we talk about our experiences in the hope that it will resonate with people, that they will speak up. and tell their truths. And then we have the resources available to get them the help and to make sure that they get the best care available to them. And thankfully, Acadia are fantastic in the sense of they don't just work for Acadia, they work for the individual. If somebody reaches out for help and it's a specific treatment that needs doing, they don't necessarily send them to their treatment facilities. They send them to the ones that will suit their needs. So they have the best interests of the client at hand. And all of the organizations that they're associated with, they've all been vetted. So they are all accredited and everything else. So to make sure that our people that come to us, that turn to us, get the best care available. That's our fundamental goal, is to educate people on trauma, resiliency, and please God, move forward. We're putting together a program around retirees, because they're the forgotten ones, right? There's an awful lot of suicide with those who leave service and they go undocumented because they're no longer in service. So we can't forget about them. So we're going to try work on a program to help them transition a little bit smoother into civilian life and give them every opportunity to enjoy their life and in a calm, good way, So we've got a lot of things going on, but we ran into a hiccup there in October. So we reshuffle of the board and we're just all finding our feet now and rebooting again. So it's all new, but it's great. It's great.
It's amazing, everything that you're doing. And I so appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about it. And I just want to be very clear to my audience, who is a sexual assault-based audience, that Irish Angel is for first responders, be it law enforcement, firefighters, EMS, military, even. Your outreach is amazing.
And dispatch anybody.
Yeah.
It doesn't even necessarily have to be within the services. If you feel that you want to reach out to us. We will never turn anybody away. We will always get them the help they need. Nobody is exempt from mental health issues.
So welcoming. And I think that's where I want to emphasize, is that, yes, there's some specific niche that Irish Angel is there for, but trauma is trauma. I know what you're talking about in terms of your own personal experience and the experiences that others in those other professions are experiencing. Sexual assault victims and survivors can relate to so much. And you've given, I think, my audience and me a really great boost in recognizing that there is so much help out there and there is so much support, and there is, yes, hard work ahead, even on a daily basis. But you are such an example with all that you went through sexually and physically, both familial and outside of your family.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's enough words to say thank you. And I consider it an honor and a privilege to not only know you, but to have you on this episode and promote and encourage and hopefully strengthen the support that you're getting from my audience also. So thank you.
No, you're welcome. I'm delighted you had me on. Thank you so much.
Amanda, this has been so great. I really appreciate it. I would love to be able to have another episode with you somewhere down the line. Maybe we could get back together and talk some more, see how things are going down the road and how things are growing and what's happening in not only your life, but the life of Irish Angel as an organization. Thank you very much.
That's the thing about me. I'm one of these people that just, I'll always be there for people. It's just how I am. It's like, we were only having this discussion earlier on. For me, it's like people say to me, why are you up so late? I'm like, I'm up till 5 every morning, because 9 times out of 10, if somebody reaches out for help, or someone is even having just a stressful day, person that I know, and they're in the United States, I always want to try be there for as many as I can. I'll always be a friendly ear for somebody. And sometimes that's all people need. They just need somebody to listen to them.
So great.
That's all they need.
It has been fun, and it's been, like I said, educational and uplifting and supportive. I think our listeners are going to gain so much from having heard you on this podcast. So thank you again.
No, thank you. I mean that. Thanks for having me on.
We'll be in touch.
You betcha.
That does it for another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. I want to give a big shout out to the Irish Angel, Amanda Coleman, and to the Irish Angel Mission. There is so much good going on as a result of the Irish Angel Mission, and it all started from Amanda's desire to support law enforcement. A big thank you also to Amanda for her willingness to share her sexual assault survivor story and for her support of interpersonal violence victims and survivors. A big thank you also to the Irish Angel team And to all first responders, dispatchers, and military, please check out the Irish Angel website at irishangel.org. And if you're able, please donate to the Irish Angel mission. Your gift will be greatly appreciated. And please remember to do your part to bring justice to victims and survivors of rape and sexual assault. One way to do that is to start by believing, because we all know someone whose life has been affected by rape or sexual assault. We'll see you next week.